In this video, for something a bit different, I have come to the British Motor Museum, home of the Jaguar Heritage Trust and one of their most special cars. Let me introduce you to LWK 707, a 1952 Jaguar XK120 fixed head coupe that way back in 1952 was driven at an average of over 100 miles an hour for an entire week. It's a fascinating car. We're going to go out for a drive in it. But first of all, let's have a look around. So the XK120 was the production car, but was never really meant to be a production car. It was kind of a concept just to try and showcase the mighty XK engine that we'll have a look at in a moment. But demand was such that Jaguar had to turn it into a full production model. Initially just in an open two-seater form, and then in 1951 this sleek fixed head coupe version was launched. And then finally, I think it was 1953, there was also a drop head coupe which had the plush interior of the fixed head and a proper folding roof. But like I said, this car is most famous for its exploits back in 1952. Can you imagine averaging 100 miles an hour around a banked concrete circuit near Paris for all that time? So the team of drivers was Leslie Johnston, whose idea it was, Stirling Moss, then young and upcoming, who had assisted him on previous endeavours, Jack Fairman and Bert Handley, and the four of them managed to just do that for a week. I just find it utterly remarkable. They didn't really modify the car very much from standard. Bonnet straps were a good idea, just to make sure that definitely didn't fly up. The rear spats removed because it's got wire wheels, and extra fuel tank capacity. So we've got an extra fuel tank on top of the factory one, a radio, so they could keep in contact, and most intriguingly for fans of this channel, we have extra wipers. So I think that they say this is because this area was unswept and it was a problem on the banking, but I also think windscreen wipers were a little unreliable back in the day and they didn't want the run ended by something simple, so a backup system was very often a thing. If you look at a lot of rally cars of the 1950s, often had a backup wiper. There were extra driving lamps fitted, although it is said that they didn't want the electric draw, so they only used the main headlamps, which they had pointed right up so they could see the top of the banking, which meant when they were doing the short straights in between, they couldn't really see where they were going at all. And I love that we've still got the original number plate. Obviously over the years it has just become slightly patinated, but yeah, still there. The paint is not original. Unfortunately, this car had a bit of an incident a few years ago at Goodwood Festival of Speed and got quite badly bent. Impact on this wing, I think it was. So the car was repainted. It was restored by the very clever people at Classic Motor Cars in Bridgnorth, but my friend Alex, Body Beautiful Limited, did the paint, and he went to extreme measures to try and replicate the look of the original paint and make it look like it hadn't been painted at all. So lots of fine layers then rubbed back just to take some of the shine out of it. And he's done an absolutely beautiful job. It's a gorgeous colour. It suits the car so well. So the bonnet lifts up and we can see the XK engine, famed twin camshaft design. A beautiful engine just to look at, but one that soon gained a reputation for being very, very powerful and quite hardy as well. Two fairly small carburetors. I think the tune on these was about 160 brake horse, although that was an SAE figure, I think, so without ancillaries on it. But you can see the lovely exhaust manifolds there. Yeah, it's a tight old engine bay, but an engine that covered over 16,000 miles in a week. I noticed we've got an extra little lamp down here, an inspection lamp, just to better show the inside of the engine when they were having to work on it in the dark. And there have been a few upgrades. We've got an alternator fitted and an electric cooling fan. And you may be thinking, well, that's not very original. But the beautiful thing about the Jaguar Heritage Trust is a great many of their cars are fully operational and working. And LWK can very often be seen at events, and I think that's just lovely. So a few subtle mods just to make sure she can keep doing demonstrations all around the world. It's lovely. Just to add, no cable or anything on this. It's all a linkage. So the throttle pedal twists this rod, which operates the carburetors like so. And this is the limit of your air filtration Just these tiny little pancake filters, which mean she's going to sound glorious when we get her out on the road a bit later on. Before we head inside the car, we'll just take in the boot. There isn't very much space left on account of the enormous fuel tanks. We've got a 42 litre one down here, and then this one extends all the way forward, and that can take 70 litres. So we've got a filler here for that bottom tank, and then an external filler for the larger one on top. And I'm not entirely sure what's going on here. That looks like it might be some sort of breather. On top we've got a jack fitted as well, and presumably there would have been a jack handle or something on that side. So not very much room for carrying spare parts, and that would actually be an issue on this. There was a problem on, I think it was the 5th day, where it actually cracked a rear spring. But rather than abort the attempt, Leslie Johnston did a 9-hour stint to ensure they got a number of records up to about 4 days. So they got them all officially signed off. But once they had to change the spring, they were then only doing it for the glory of knowing they had done it. It would not be an official record from that point on. Now, I don't know if it was because it was rubbing generally or if it was rubbing because the spring broke, but you can see dents all around this rear wing where they had to get some pliers in and just ease the wing away to stop it rubbing on this wheel. It's a clockwise circuit, so this side of the car would have taken an enormous hammering throughout that long trip. Just before we head inside, I love how this roof line just is so evocative of the Jaguar saloons of that time. All had this rakish look going on. But here's the door, opens very wide, but it's quite an interesting car to get into because the gap between the steering wheel and the seat is so very, very small. But look at the luxury. It's got the standard 120 fixed head interior. So we've got leather seats, we've got wood on the dashboard. It's a really rather nice place to be. Getting in is a little inelegant. You kind of have to put one leg in, but then try and get it under the steering wheel, like so, and then fold in the other leg. I'm getting better every time, so I'm starting to find my way into the car. But yeah, look how vast the steering wheel is. It's got a little indicator switch on the top, and 4-speed manual gearbox, no synchro mesh on first gear, a fly-off handbrake. And a fly-off handbrake means you just do that and the handbrake is off. You pull it on, you press the button to lock it into place. Better for your racy starts. In terms of modifications, we've got a radio control here, which they used throughout the week-long event to stay in touch with each other. Just going to close this door before it blows away in the wind. This bit of wood isn't all in the best condition, but this is an old car, unrestored, and I just love it. I just love how luxurious it was. But yeah, we've got a couple of clocks. We've got a little map torch for illuminating any part of the interior you might want to. We've got the heater fitted, posh, switch for the panel lights. I think that's an oil check. Starter button. We've got ignition lights variously, an ignition key. Because this car is used, they keep it nice and obvious as to what things are. Wipers, that's the bottom two. The top one is controlled by this switch. I fear it may be broken because I think that's meant to be over there, but if you pull it out, you can operate that wiper like so. We'll operate the other wipers a little later on. Choke control is just a switch. You pull it out, it's on choke, you push it back in, you're off choke. We've even got the cigarette lighter. You know, essentially, if you're doing 100 miles an hour, you definitely want to be able to light your cigarettes. And we've got a tiny interior light, which I don't know where that was fit. Oh yes, here we go, interior lights. Just tucked in here at the back. You can see the rather inelegant method of securing the roof antenna in place for the radio, but you know, it just had to work. That was it. We've got, oh, it's locked. We've got a tiny little glove box just there. But yeah, the driving position, you're almost lying down really, but it's very cozy down here, very cramped, and you can't move the seat. The seat is fixed, so that's as good as it's going to get. We've got winding windows here in the front, as well as quarter lights, but we've also got these little opening vent windows here in the back as well to just help get airflow through the car. It's lovely. I wish you could smell it in here. It just smells absolutely delicious. Windscreen washers I think have probably been fitted slightly later in life. It's got a rain button to make it rain, and that's an override for the electric cooling fan, and then we've got a switch. So this will be an original feature to switch between the two tanks, and the fog lights that they didn't use for fear of overloading the electrical system. But it's kind of like a Citroen C4, because the center of the steering wheel doesn't move. That is fixed in place, but you've got this thing sort of aimed right at your chest. And of course there are no seatbelts in here, so taking my life into my hands driving this car. But such was life. But all this gearbox intrusion from the gearbox down there, I think there was, yeah, there would still be using a Moss gearbox, of course, at this time. So we'll get plenty of evocative first gear whine. But let's get you set up, and we'll actually take this car out for a drive. I'm looking forward to this ever so much. Oh, I forgot to take in the tiny little mirror. Hello there. That's a nice touch as well. There is no easy way of getting into this car. I'm just waiting for my escort. They're just going to have a chap following me. They like to keep an eye on this car, as you can well imagine. It is one of their halo cars in the collection. That collection also includes things like the V12 engined XJ13 that was developed for Le Mans but never raced there. And they've got former Formula 1 cars, and yeah, a whole host of very, very lovely cars, including this car's sister, Nub 120, which was an XK120 used by Ian Appleyard. I think he married the daughter of Sir William Lyons, and he used that car in all manner of rallies, and they've still got that car in lovely condition as well. Okay, here we go then. Fire up the engine. Just sounds like a road car. It really is nothing special. I suspect they tweaked things a little bit just to make sure they definitely got the speed, but to all intents and purposes this is a road car, and it behaves like one. Barely any throttle, just easing her away. Oh, he says. Classic whine of a straight cut first gear. Have to tweak the interior one a bit. There we go. Oh no, doesn't want to go there. Okay, fine. LDWK, you've earned the right. You do what you like, love. So we go gently up the museum grounds into second gear. Things get a lot quieter. A lot of induction roar, because you've got an engine that effectively has open intakes. They're really not very well damped. That wasn't the aim at all. A sports car should be sporty. And if you're wondering about wipers, there you go. We've done our wiper test. Quite the chasm of unswept doom in the middle there. We'll get ready to take her out on the open road. But of course it's such a physical car to drive. The steering is really heavy and the seat is really slippy. So how on earth they brace themselves? You just got to hold on to this gargantuan steering wheel and hope for the best. Because they were doing this for a week at much higher speeds than I'm going. I'm going to indicate right. We are going right. I believe it just makes the side lights flash at the front and the rear lights as well, because that's what you did at the time. Oh yes. It's a classic sort of a bellow. So while you're thinking, oh come on Hubnut, this is not a very Hubnut car at all, it sort of is, because I love it and it's my YouTube channel, so there. Even though she's geared to do, you know, 100 miles an hour as an average figure, so well mannered. You can go so slow in really high gears because there's just so much torque available. 3.5 litres, 3,442 cc, twin overhead camshafts, very unusual for its time, and it was meant to be an engine for its saloons, but Jaguar ended up using that XK engine in all manner of sports cars. we're just going to drive through Gaydon Village and then we can really open her up. But I love this. This is living history. It's so nice that these cars are kept usable. Apologies for LWK, I don't know what happened there. No seatbelts, of course. They didn't really bother with that sort of thing back then. But if you go to the Jaguar Daimler Heritage Trust website, they've got a good write-up on this car. If you then follow the link to Leslie Johnston, the chap whose idea it was, there's a separate page on him, and it talks about some of the antics they were getting up to on that thing, just to try and keep themselves sane. Because just imagine, it'd just rot your mind just doing that, pounding endlessly. Here we go, 50 miles an hour. That's only 3,000 revs. Oh, by modern standards, of course it's not fast. And the steering is a little unpredictable and just not that assured. Rack and pinion steering would come later in Jaguar's sports car line. But by gosh, does it feel nice to be driving this car. You know, I've known this car my whole life, and its life is much older still, but I remember reading about it in books. I wrote a magazine feature about this very car a few years ago for Jaguar, Classic Jaguar magazine rather. Just lovely. The speedometer optimistically goes up to 180 miles an hour. Let's not crash into a tractor. But what gets me is these records were set. It's just a standard production car, and you can drive it on the road and it's perfectly comfortable. The ride is actually really quite pleasant. It's a little firm but not jarring. Far more composed than you might expect, really. I bet these workmen have no idea what's about to come blasting past them. Let's pull on the handbrake, press the button for it to hold. Might come out of neutral, don't want to hold her on the clutch. Yeah, it's just magical. And they only just got their 100 mile an hour average as well. The final average was calculated at 100.31 miles an hour. So they were having to try and lap at about 120, because that average included times to stop and maintain the car and do whatever's necessary. And you think how frequent oil changes were back then, and yet this car covered 16,000 miles in a week. Crazy. Oh yes, that is a noise. But one story that is very much coming to mind at the moment is when Stirling Moss was driving, one of the other drivers kept putting a sign in the middle of the track and would move it closer and closer to a building. So he was having to aim it for a tiny gap. It was getting smaller every time he went round. And I have to say, the steering is not particularly accurate. That must have been terrifying. Another time, apparently, he came round and his co-drivers were sat in the middle of the track playing a card game. So yeah, lunatic times. But yeah, it's not hard to see why the XK120 became an absolute legend. It just set the scene for every Jaguar sports car that followed. They are lovely cars to drive. They make such beguiling noises, and of course the performance, especially for the standards of the time, is just extraordinary. Nothing to write home about today. 160 brake horse is nothing, but back then this was big power. You consider a Morris Minor would have been struggling to do 60 miles an hour back in the day. There is a certain amount of nervousness attached to driving a car like this in traffic, but I'm pleased to say that they do regularly take this car out. It was at Bicester Scramble earlier this year, I believe. But yeah, if you jumped into this from a modern car expecting it to handle and brake just like one, then I'm afraid you would be very, very disappointed. But look how docile it is. It's just lovely. So before that rear spring broke, the car did win a number of records. I think the fastest one was at about 110 miles an hour. I think that was the 72 hours, and then it gradually started getting slower because there were inevitably more stops. But you know, she's not even that bad over the speed humps. This long bonnet out in front of you is the classic sports car shape. But of course the XK120 experienced most success in America. She sold in huge numbers there, and I get it entirely. Oh, that's just 40 miles an hour. But it feels like an experience in this car. Oh, did someone say national speed limit? Oh yeah, I have to say that feels mildly terrifying. I'm a little wary because I did once find myself enjoying an XK120 too much, and I did experience some terrifying brake fade. But certainly as a way of demonstrating just how capable these cars are, that record was a very fine way to do it. Sadly Leslie Johnston, whose idea it was, he passed away in 1959. He was still fairly young for his age. Other drivers did a fair bit better. You might know that Stirling Moss chap. He did quite well for himself. Never won a world championship, but still one of the finest racing drivers of his time. He was just unfortunate enough to be the same time as Juan Manuel Fangio. But oh my gosh, this is such hard work. I know they wouldn't have had oncoming traffic and people parking badly, but it's so heavy to drive. The steering really is very heavy indeed, and quite twitchy really. You're constantly having to make corrections. And the clutch is heavy, the gear change is quite heavy. Oh, there's a lovely downshift there into third. Bit of rev blip in it, just helps the cogs engage. Oh yes. Oh, this is no museum piece, folks. This is real living history, and it sounds sublime. Imagine how noisy this is now. We are doing 60 miles an hour. We'd have to go an awful lot faster. So we're doing about 2,600 RPM here. So the rev counter must have been around here somewhere. For hours, for days. Just remarkable. Utterly remarkable. So the XK engine powering this car lived on until the early 1990s and the end of the Daimler DS420, 92 I think that was. The last Jaguar to have the XK engine was, I think that's in their trust, an XJ6 Saloon from about 1986. Oh, this makes you feel so alive. I'm just not sure I'd like to do it for an entire week. Definitely one of those pinch yourself moments. Want to see another pinch yourself moment? Back in 2019 or was it 18? I think it was 2018. I went to the Netherlands and drove the only SS100 Jaguar coupe in the world. That was even more terrifying if I'm honest. Oh yes, have to be a bit patient with that synchro second. Oh gosh, she pulls well. So that's why, folks, that's why Hubnut, the home of affordable motoring, is swanning round in an absolute icon of motoring history. it's mostly just that it sounds like that, and it's so achingly pretty. So there we go. LWK is back home here at the Jaguar Daimler Heritage Trust, where they've got all sorts going on. That's the XJR5 is going to be getting fired up later today, I think. Exciting times, getting ready for shows. But yeah, a fascinating car, a piece of living history, an absolute joy to drive. So thank you very much to the Trust for trusting me with this absolute icon. It's a fascinating history, and I'm glad cars like this live on to tell their tale. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in a future video. Farewell. Best number plate ever.